All right, so today I want to talk about Evelyn the Covetous, and we're going to be doing a deck tech on her. It's just a really fun card. I played her in the 99 of the first deck I ever played in Commander. It was a Lord Xander the Collector deck, and she always had an impact on the board. She's really good for hitting land drops, but she can also be a really powerful combo commander in herself. Basically, when she or another vampire enters the battlefield under my control, every player exiles the top card of your library, and I could play one of those cards per turn that have a collection counter. So it gives them a collection counter when you exile that card. And I can spend mana as though it's any color. Important thing to note, you're playing that card, so you can play lands from exile, and it's whenever another vampire enters the battlefield, so you don't have to cast it from your hand. Or it doesn't even have to be a non-token vampire, it could be creature tokens as well. So lots of low CMC vampires in the deck. I'm gonna apologize for the lighting and the camera quality. I'm honestly just recording this on my iPhone. I thought it would be something fun to do. So we've got Falcon Wrath, Pith Fighter. She's just a cheap vampire that can get me value. I can discard a card and start sacking vampires to draw cards if I really need to search for an answer. It does cost 2 mana, but it can be worth it in time. Viserys here, another really nice sack outlet that gives me a lot of value just in case somebody board wipes and I have a full board of vampires, and he's also very low CMC. Low CMC, Death Touch, Lifelink, so it gives you a board presence and makes it hard for people to attack you. Another low CMC vampire, and you get a blood token, so it helps you in the late game if you need to search for answers. Voltaire and Epicure there. Indulgent Aristocrat, another sack outlet, but we're really not doing too much Aristocrat stuff, but 1 mana vampire, which is perfect. We're going through, I kind of ordered these all by CMC, so we're going to see all the 1 mana vampires, and then we'll get to the higher mana value here in a second. Knight of the Even Legion, again, it's a great turn 1 play, especially if you don't have a lot to do and you're waiting to cast Evelyn. You can hold up the threat of giving him Death Touch at any point, so it makes it hard for people to attack you, and you could also just get in some cheap damage and start putting +1/+1 counters on him, because if an opponent loses 4 or more life, he gets a counter. So 2 mana vampire, it just gives you the flexibility to pay 4 for the kicker cost and black and 3 colorless, and then you can return a vampire from your graveyard to the battlefield, which could be really valuable in the late game. Cordial Vampire, he works great, especially with the sack outlets, but it's also whenever another creature dies. So it doesn't have to be your own creatures. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on your team, which is great and can be very valuable. Voldaren Bloodcaster, this is just a cheap vampire that can get you some blood tokens, which lets you filter your deck a little bit. Bloodthirsty Adversary, another cheaper vampire, and then we're never really going to be using that second effect where you can pay 2 in a red and you get to put that many +1/+1 counters, pay it any amount of time. So put a ton of +1/+1 counters, then you can exile a bunch of instant sorcery cards from our graveyard and copy them, which could be good. We run a lot of tutors in this deck, so it could be a great way to get one of those back and search for a combo, or just search for value if we need a board wipe, all that fun stuff. Vran, cheap vampire that gets me value when my creatures die. With sack outlets, we can use that to start draining our opponents, or just throughout the game things are going to die. Blood Tithe Harvester, he works as removal if you have enough blood tokens, and just cheap vampire. Blood Gas is great because, like I said earlier, Evelyn's trigger, you don't have to cast. It's whenever a vampire ETBs. So when you're throwing lands on the battlefield after he's died, you can return him. So he's great. You can use him as a sack outlet, or you can sacrifice him to your sack outlets and just get a lot of value out of him. Blood Artist, self-explanatory. We're going to be winning the game off of Blood Artist. She's just going to be dealing damage anytime creatures die, so get a big board, put her on the board. If everybody has a big board and somebody decides to board wipe, you're going to get a ton of value and you're going to gain a lot of life, which is great. vampire socialite. Cheap vampire, gives your vampires +1/+1 counters depending on when you play her. And she's a good creature. She's just value. Asylum Visitor, we're not really focusing on her ability too much. A lot of the time people aren't going to have no cards in hand, and there's not a lot of force discard. I used to run a lot of force discard in this deck, and the idea was that I'd make everyone discard their hand, and I just, including myself, and then I would just get value off of Evelyn's exile triggers and use everyone's spells against them. But it turned more into a combo deck with generic value plays by just playing vampires. This is a new vampire that I think is going to work really well in the deck. He creates 1/1 vampire creature tokens, and he has Death Touch, and he's a 2/4, so he's kind of hard to block in combat, and he's likely to survive. You have to attack the person with the most life or tied for the most life, and if you have the most life or you're tied, you get to draw. So you're either going to get a draw, or you're going to essentially draw 4 off of Evelyn's exile trigger. Bruno, one of my pet cards in the deck. It's not like the best card in the world, but you can get some vampires back from your graveyard and put them on top of your library. We're not flipping him ever. We don't really have any 6-mana creatures in the deck. Really just generic value, and I love Bruno. It's one of the first decks I built, so I have him in the deck just so I can look at him and look at those abs, you know. Got the Stromkirk Captain. It's just an anthem effect for our vampires if we end up building a big team. Captivating Vampire, again, if we build a big team. He's an anthem, but he also, you can tap 5 of your vampires and just steal someone's creatures and steal someone's commander and really make it difficult for them to finish you off or get their value pieces going. Vito's a good vampire. There's some life gain stuff in the deck. We run an Exquisite Blood. We run Blood Artist. And giving all our creatures lifelink is a great option as well. There's a lot of ways that we could be damaging ourselves in this deck, so being able to gain some of that life back is important. Markov Baron, he's got Convoke, he's got lifelink, and he's the anthem. Really, the most important thing is that Convoke, like, he's a 3-mana vampire, but he could also be a 0-mana vampire, which is great because you get an Evelyn trigger, you exile 4 cards, and you get a ton of value off of him. Bloodline Keeper, she's great. You get to create a bunch of 2/2 creature tokens, so a nice cycle, or a nice way to play this is play her when you have 4 mana, right? And then you hold Evelyn up because she has Flash. That's something I forgot to mention, but it is important. The next turn you hold Evelyn up, and since you played her when you had 4 CMC or 4 mana, you'll be able to tap her as soon as Evelyn enters the battlefield. So you just hold her up as a blocker, and then play Evelyn on the person whose turn it is right before you. And then you get the Evelyn trigger, and then you tap her, and you get another Evelyn trigger. And then you can transform her, and she becomes a huge anthem for your team, which is great. Some copy effects. These are great in the deck because then every time we play a vampire, we're getting 2 Evelyn triggers for each player. So you play a 1-mana vampire and you exile 8 cards from the tables, from the top of everyone's. Not like 8 like for each player, but it's a total of 8 cards. Everybody exiles 2. And then you also get to play 2 cards per turn because the once each turn clause, you have 2 of those now. So you get to play multiple cards from exile. So if you're in a very commanding position of the game and you have a ton of like counter spells and protection in exile, like you get to double up on that. So it can be a problem when you have just Evelyn out and you don't have any counter spells in hand or interaction, and you're holding up interaction from exile because everyone can see it. But this makes it a little bit more flexible where people can see it, but they're going to have to get past 2 spells more often than not. Same thing here, just another copy effect. And then we get into Necropotence, which is just a great way to draw a ton of cards, get to tutors that we need to execute our combos and just get a lot of value out of that. Heuristic Study, you just like drawing cards. I am an evil person. I like to ask people if they want to pay the one. It's one of my favorite things to do, personally. Black Market Connections, the treasure token draw card is great, but this is also awesome in this deck because the 3/2 colorless shapeshifter is also a vampire because it has changelings. So yeah, you're probably taking 6 each turn, but we have ways to gain life back in the deck. I mean, we have Necropotence, so we need to have some ways to gain life back. And it also just is great because you're getting Evelyn triggers off that shapeshifter every turn. Leyline, if we can get lucky and get this in our opening hand, Leyline is amazing. But still, 4 mana for Flash is great, especially in this deck because once Evelyn has Flash, you can, or once all your spells have Flash, you could start playing vampires from exile with Evelyn's ability, and then you're just storming off after that. You're exiling a ton of cards from everybody's library, you're exiling your opponent's combo pieces or interaction, and you're using it against them, and it's really good in the deck. Some ramp, because Evelyn's 5 mana, and we want to get to her as soon as possible. We're not running the most ridiculous ramp of this deck. There's no Mana Crypt or Jeweled Lotus, but your typical Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, Mind Stone. Lots of artifact ramp because we're not in green, unfortunately. Iron Crag, I mean, we don't really need the equipment, but it's a good land, or it's a good ramp spell. Thran Dynamo, because having that 3 mana and being able to spend mana as though as any color is great in this deck because basically you could use all your lands. Somebody's got a Teferi's Protection out. Oh, well, one of those taps for white or any color really, so it's awesome. Glasscast Heart, this is just a way to create vampire tokens if we're not drawing into vampires or we don't have a lot that we can play from exile and keep getting those Evelyn triggers. Cloudstone Curio or Elisar, the Elfstone from the Lord of the Rings set. Whenever a non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type. So the idea behind this is you have 2 1-mana vampires on the board, preferably like red and black. You play the red one, bounce the black one back to your hand, play the black one, bounce the red one, and then you just get a ton of value off of Evelyn's triggers, and hopefully you could just win the game from there with all the interaction and protection spells you'll probably get off of that from everybody. Bolas's Citadel, just a great way to filter through our deck and get to some of those combo pieces that we want so that we can win the game. Vidalcan Orrery, same thing as Leyline. We want to cast spells with as though they have Flash. It is a big ask to take a turn off and just not do anything, or I mean, you just spend 4 mana on your turn and then maybe hold up interaction to protect your board. But if you could untap with this, it becomes a very, very good value piece in this deck. Essence Flux, this is a great way to flicker Evelyn. So not only do you get another Evelyn trigger, but since she's re-entering the battlefield, you can cast 2 spells from exile. If you do this, this also interacts with our combo. Here, I'm going to put this over here because we're talking about the combo now that we want to use to win. Displace, exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. And Ghostly Flicker, exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then return those cards under the battlefield under your control. And Dual Caster Mage. When he enters the battlefield, copy target instant sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. He has Flash. So this, just Dual Caster Mage and Ghostly Flicker can win the game at instant speed, even if Evelyn is not on the board, because Evelyn has Flash. So how this play pattern would work is you would cast Ghostly Flicker on the stack. You would cast Dual Caster Mage, having him enter the battlefield with Ghostly Flicker on the stack. You'll use his ability to copy Ghostly Flicker, and then you will flicker a land and Dualcaster Mage, copying Ghostly Flicker again, and then your land is untapped. And then you can keep doing this until you have enough mana to play Evelyn. And then once you have enough mana for Evelyn, you're gonna just start using the copy to to exile Dualcaster Mage and Evelyn and return them to the battlefield. And then you essentially exile everyone's library. You can do this at instant speed. So if you want to, you could do this at the opponent's turn next to you, who's next in turn order. Do it during his upkeep, and then all of a sudden you exile all the cards from their library and they have nothing to draw. And they lose the game, they pass the turn, next opponent loses the game, pass the turn, next opponent loses the game, goes back to you, everybody's dead. So you will lose if you have to draw. So if somebody has a spell that says they can't lose the game, like everybody lives, then even if you force that draw, they still live. So if they cast that during their upkeep, you're kind of screwed. So it can be risky, but there's a lot of counter spells and interaction to try and stop that. This combo also works with Displace, except you have to have Evelyn on the battlefield because it's just creatures. And then if for some reason you play Dualcaster Mage early, you can use Essence Flux with Ghostly Flicker on the stack on Dualcaster Mage to start making copies and make the combo happen. So that's the big combo in the deck that's really going to win us games. It's a lot of fun. No, I'm just kidding. It's never fun to pull that off. You just feel mean. But this is a deck that I felt like needed more win cons. I wasn't really playing it at a CEDH level. There's no like World Gorger Dragon combos in here. So I figured I'd just throw one combo in there, especially with all the tutor pieces we have and tutor pieces we'll be getting from other opponents' libraries if they run tutors. Counter spells, you know, the typical good suite of counter spells. Pact is great because we can win at instant speed, and it doesn't matter if we have to pay 5 because everyone's dead by then. Fierce Guardianship, I mean, expensive counter spells in here, but I'd say you need them just to keep it alive. So we're running a total of 5 traditional counter spells. I think there's more. I might be wrong there. Am I counting Deflecting Swat as a counter spell? Well, we can. Let's say 6. Malakir Rebirth. This is just a land, a tapped land, or even better, if somebody tries to kill Evelyn, you can target her with this and then get to return her to the battlefield. And since you are returning her to the battlefield, you get another Evelyn trigger. You can cast another spell that turn, which is nice. Valakut Awakening, another MDFC that is also just a great way to draw more cards, get to our tutors, get to some vampires if we need, get rid of hands we don't need. Deadly Rollick, want to run a little bit of single targeted removal. I don't run a lot of single targeted removal in my decks. I prefer counter spells and board wipes, but we definitely want to run some where we can, and then we get to aggro mauling. It's one of my favorite removal spells to run in black because I don't have to actually give up a deck slot for the removal spell. It's a tapped land as well, which is perfect. Another MDFC. Cyclonic Rift. I'm weird, and I kind of think of this as a single target removal spell, or an amazing board wipe, but like I am willing to just rip a Cyclonic Rift on something that's really problematic on the board, especially if I have a counter spell and I can get rid of it permanently, or if it forces my opponent to commit the rest of their turn to something else, and I'm going to win on my next turn. It's a great spell. I think of it as both, even though 99% of the time you're playing it as a board wipe. Dark Ritual, great way to get Evelyn out early, especially because she has Flash, so you could do this on the end step right before your turn, and surprise everybody with like a turn 3 Evelyn that they were not expecting at all, or even a turn 1 Evelyn if you, or a turn 2 Evelyn if you have a Soul Ring out on turn 1. Mystical Tutor, get to some of the tutors here. Vampiric Tutor. Gamble, you know, we're running combos, so we've got a set of like 4 tutors. then actually 5. This is great though, because you choose yourself and an opponent, and if they're not in on it or haven't quite figured it out, they're putting the spell they're tutoring for on top of their library as well as you, but then you just use Evelyn's trigger. You play a vampire right after and you exile that card. So if you're playing this in a familiar play group, or you describe the play pattern, which I kind of like to do, it feels kind of dirty just exiling somebody's best card. But if you are playing this in a group where, you know, there's an arch enemy, you could say, hey, if you tutor for a removal spell, like, I'll use it on this. Or you could also just screw people over with it and exile their best thing in their library. We love MDFCs, so this is a great one. We're running lots of cheap vampires, so if we can get it perfectly, I mean, 7 mana, you get back 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, and 4 mana vampire from your graveyard, automatic board state, tons of Evelyn triggers. You could even pay 8 mana into this if you decide to put Evelyn in your graveyard, and then you get even more value out of it, and you get all those exile triggers. I think it's a good card in any deck. Another way to copy Evelyn, get more triggers. Generic value, but also since you can spend mana as any color, having a ton of red mana off of Jessica's Will when you choose an opponent. If you don't know how this works, you can choose an opponent with the most cards in hand and you add red mana equal to that. And then if you control your commander, you also get to exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them this turn. If you don't control your commander, you can choose either option, but everyone's always adding the red mana. Toxic Deluge, board wipe. Blasphemous Axe, another very cheap board wipe. We want to run low CMC board wipes. Sanguinate for generic value. If we can get a ton of mana on board, we could just gain a lot of life back, especially if we're burning ourselves in a lot of ways. And then we get to some of the lands. I do run a Cabal, Coffers, and Urborg in this deck because there's so much tutoring going on. I feel like if we get one piece, we can probably find our way to the other. It is scary because we're not running a ton of swamps, so getting a Cabal Coffers just by itself can be very disappointing. And then not really too much in terms of spiciness with the lands, just a lot of dual color lands or pathways that we can choose a color. More of a focus on black mana or swamps. If you look at Evelyn here, she's got hybrid mana, right? So you could pay a red or a swamp. You could pay a black. You could pay a black by itself, or you could play a blue or a black. So essentially, if you wanted to, you could run Evelyn as a mono black deck, a Rakdos deck, or a Dimir deck. But I chose to use all 3 colors because a wise man once said, if your deck has blue in it, why would you not play blue? Yeah, but that was my first deck tech. I don't know, just wanted to talk about this deck. I have a lot of fun with it. It's one of my favorites and want to post more of these. Obviously, I'm going to work on the quality and get something to hold my camera because just holding my phone with my shaky hands is not the best way to show off the deck. But hope anyone who watches this enjoyed, and feel free to give it a like. Cheers.